Educating, informing, serving. Fact TV, keeping government honest.
Falls Union High School District, Monday, April 13th. Any adjustments to the agenda?
I have none.
I have none.
None.
Thank you. Review and approve the board minutes of March 9th. Anybody have any adjustments?
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes of March 9th.
This happened. Oh, okay.
All those in favor of approving the minutes for March 9th, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, but you have to call it.
Everyone call their name, please.
Oh, excellent.
Hold on, I've lost
Sure.
everyone here.
Ah.
Jack Breyer, aye.
Priscilla, aye.
Deborah Wright, aye.
Margot
Colin James,
Gia, aye.
aye.
Margot Gia, aye.
David, aye.
The ayes have it. I didn't hear Colin.
Colin James, aye.
Thank you. So the minutes have been approved for March 9th, 2020. Is there any communication or public comments? Doesn't sound like there's any.
And I would just add, Molly, at this point, that if people want, if they do have something they would like to ask the board at some point, they could open up and post it in the chat window, and I'll keep an eye on that throughout the meeting.
Okay. There's no policies, correct?
Correct.
Superintendent's report.
All right, thank you, everyone. I'm just gonna get right into it. The other day on March 9th, had our weekly conference call with Secretary French, so I'm just gonna go over some of the points that were shared during that meeting, but I'm gonna first start off with, I sent this out the end of last week, is that over the past week, the food services program has served over 3,850 breakfasts, 3,850 lunches for around 7,700 meals last week alone. And that's a huge undertaking. And I'd like to thank all the bus drivers, the food service, all the volunteers, everyone who's making this possible, because that's a very impressive number. And it does take a large amount of organization from everybody's part: teachers, food services, transportation, administrators, everyone. So I wanted to start off with that to share, some good news during this time.
Chris, was that March 9th or did you mean April 9th?
April 9th. I'm sorry. Thank you.
You're welcome. Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. The days run together. We don't want the months to run together yet.
Yeah.
So last week, the governor stated that COVID seems to be reaching a plateau, and it should be at a plateau for the next 10 days. So they'll keep an eye on that. As far as the Wyndham Northeast school calendar, we are going to continue to implement that as established. We're not going to veer from that right now. We will be feeding students over the April break. That was, I put that out, an announcement to all families last Friday, with the normal pickups and drop-offs for meals. So they will have access to food over April vacation. Getting into some of the reimbursement for COVID under the CARES Act, which is the federal stimulus package. We should be able to use that. We're hoping to get some flexibility from the feds and how that money is used. And right now, from what we can tell, about 80% of how we'll get our lion's share of that is most likely it's going to be like 80% of the Title I monies that we currently have. And So that's what they're looking at, for a formula, is really distributing it based on how we currently are distributed consolidated federal funds. So CARES Act money, like I said, we're hoping to have the flexibility to use that money to pay for COVID-related expenses, such as technology, if it ties into, food-related, even to the point where you could use it for broadband. But the governor and the Secretary of Education really said that we're looking at stuff for broadband in those particular items. That's a state problem. It's more than just a school problem. So hopefully we won't have to use, when that stimulus money comes in, we don't have to use it for something like that, because that does have a huge expense tied to it, or has the possibility for that. The AOE is currently working on pre-K guidance for the continuity of education, similar to what they've done for K through 12. So we're expecting and waiting for some feedback on the continuity of education, what it looks like for pre-K. By the end of the year, the Secretary of Education needs to give the governor a recommendation on closure or opening, and what that would look like from the superintendent standpoint, and what that would look like and how that would impact going back to school or staying where we are, how that would impact the end of the year. They're very well aware, and they're keeping an eye on the situation, such as graduations and such. They're trying to find a way to, have some sort of celebration if we don't go back into the schools by the end of the year. So everyone is keeping a close eye on that. Also, they're still working on investigating and professional development statewide, how we can kind of pool our resources together to make something happen in regards to SUs working together. I know Windham County superintendents have spent a lot of time, even before, pre this COVID situation, that we're looking at how we can use resources to offer more professional development for teachers. AOE has a new platform that was established last week. This will help with processing and disseminating information, so families and parents have access and ongoing access to this ongoing information above and beyond what superintendents and principals are putting out there. AOE sent out a survey last week to identify current broadband issues around the state. Windham Northeast did participate in that survey, so they're aware of what our needs are for our area. And so getting into what we're seeing already in regards to the impact from this, the COVID situation, is right now it's about $72 million higher statewide for education spending currently right now since we started this, and a $25 million increase in the healthcare spending statewide that we're looking at. Options for reducing spending as we start getting into it are limited, because in regards to where those reductions can come from, because 82% of all school budgets is taken up by salaries and benefits. So it kind of really kills the creativity behind where, if we're reducing monies, where that money is going to come from. And seeing 82% of any budget is salaries and benefits. The education funds stabilization reserves would end the year with a fund balance of about 36.4 million. Today's officials are projecting a 39.5 million shortfall. And so for a total of a little over 73 million altogether. And the projected surplus of the 12.9 million that they had, based on the conversation that Secretary French had with us last week, is that's evaporated. So that 12.9 million is gone. So when you put all that together, we're looking at education spending down about 90 million deficit. Worst case scenario, the 39.5 million in relief will not show up until next year, the 2021 year. Revenues have dropped, like I said, around $90 million so far. Let's see. revised estimate suggests revenue generated by the sales and rooms and meal taxes that do help out and assist with educating our students will generate 88.7 million less than previously projected for the education fund. And that's part of that, overall number. And, yes, this is very serious what we're talking about here. And I don't, be the bearer of bad news, but it is what it is in regards to, how grim it looks in regards to, we're only a month and a half into this, and the hits that we're taking in regards to long-term spending. With all this said, towns are still going to be required to send and remit to the state for education the monies, and so you can see where that problem lies. You can't. It's pretty much that old saying: you can't get blood from a stone, and so there's a domino effect there that we all know. But as we continue to be in the state that we're in, it sounds to me that the state, more and more things are coming to light in regards to how this is going to affect us long term. And when they say long term, it's not necessarily this year. It's for starting for the 2021 school year. So in regards to flexibility and waiver requests from the AOE, the feds have been very supportive. And we should know more next week in regards to, like I said earlier, about the stimulus money coming down from the feds. Let me see if there's anything else. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. I mean, I could go on for another 20 minutes in regards to everything we're seeing and how much it's changing on a daily basis. But I think if you're like me, any of you who are on this conference call right now, you're keeping just a pretty much close eye on the situation as well. And at this point, it's really tough to know where we're going to be at the end of the school year versus where we're going to be when we start school in the fall. And so, like I said, you heard all the numbers I was just reading. It's not looking very good. So, we do have to be prepared for worst case scenarios. Hope for the best and plan for the worst is pretty much the approach I want to take. And also to let people know is that I'm trying to get information out there as much as possible. But I'm also cautious in regards to putting information out too soon because how rapidly it's changing. So sometimes you're not going to see a post every day because of that rapidly changing information that is out there. So that's where we stand right now. In regards to most recently, what's more related to us is that we do have our continuity of education plan that was created, sent off to the state. We all worked on it at the end of last week. Teachers know their responsibilities, and the next step is sometime this week we'll be putting out to parents in regards to what that looks like. It really isn't really changing too much for what we've currently been doing over the last 2.5, 3 weeks in regards to learning. So I don't anticipate it really changing all too much for families and students. It's really a plan that we put in place, and now we just put it in writing and sent it up to the state so they're aware of it. So any families out there that are listening, moving forward after vacation, it's going to look pretty much the same as it has for you grades K through 12, except for we're going to continue to push the technology and the devices out there for families so they have that and continue to keep an eye on everything. So as you start seeing things posted and coming out, just know that it really doesn't change too much for students and families. We're going to continue to move forward and provide all the same services that we have been providing. So the continuity of education plan is just something that the state has, and they know what we're doing and how we're doing it, and how we're taking attendance for kids, how we're checking in on families and making sure there is a level of learning and education going on throughout the state. So that's where we are right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Chris? Can we unmute Steve?
Yeah, let me.
Because he's talking.
He just has to hit his microphone.
Steve, you got to unmute. We can't hear you, Steve. Stephen Fine. Looks like he gave up.
Can I just add one thing? I did note that in your report, Chris, that it mentioned some of the ongoing things that were available and still you were putting on hold. I do know that the Women's Club put out about a month ago that they were not participating in the Women's Club art show at all. So I don't know if that impacts you're leaving that in your reports or taking it out.
Which Chris are you talking to?
You.
In
Because
that,
your superintendent's report was at the bottom, your list of things that were still there and still planning kind of thing. But I think that's probably.
that's for the, that would be the March reports
Yeah.
from
okay.
last month. Yeah.
Colin,
No,
I just want to say thank you to our superintendent for, keeping the community as informed as, the best he's been doing. I think it's been really good communication wise. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Fine, would you like to try again?
I think, can you hear me now?
We gotcha.
I was asking Mr. Pratt if he has any suggestions or recommendations to make in light of all of the news that he's presented.
And suggestions in regards to what level, Stephen?
What do we do about the fact that there's going to be a shortfall in dollars? That's the question.
Well, and that's, it's a great question because right now we're looking at, we have to make decisions soon because April 15th in regards to the CBA, we have to determine if we're going to have RIFs for next year and what that looks like.
And that's why I'm asking you whether you have any recommendation with respect to that.
Yeah, right now my recommendation is to, my personal recommendation moving forward is with not knowing how it's going to be in the fall, but we are going to have to educate kids, and kids are going to have to come back in the building, and they're going to be behind at some capacity. Is that I don't think we're in a position right now to say that we can RIF any teachers in regards to providing education for kids next year. There's not enough information for us to say that that we're not going to need these teachers for the fall.
So the answer to my question is no.
I have a plan
Yes,
and
no.
I've got it prepared for agenda item 8A.
Yeah, Stephen, accurate. I wish I had, but it's too many unknowns. I don't have, an answer except for all I know is the kids are going to be coming back. And, at this point, I can't say we should be riffing teachers in the fall because of, the struggle we're going to have with them coming back.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Okay, couple of things. I know that Chris and possibly both Chris's were part of the conference call with the Joint Fiscal Office that summarized these shortfalls. And they were asked specifically in terms of what they were going to recommend to the AOE and of the state regarding these shortfalls. And they basically felt that for this current year, the monies had been spent in large part, and they had enough money in the kitty despite these shortfalls to get us through the current year. That was one of the messages that they made fairly loud and clear, as opposed to this current upcoming 2021 year. It was also clear that they were still struggling to come up with a recommendation because as far as the AOE and as far as the JFO is concerned, collecting of the bulk of the money, which is real estate tax money, is a town responsibility, irrespective of ability to pay, whether you like that or whether you don't. That was one of the points they made. And they also made the point that those communities that didn't have budgets approved yet were in a position where they really couldn't bear the brunt of the cost savings. And at the same time, for the bulk of those communities that had passed budgets, the timeline for riffing people was either had approached or was rapidly approaching. We have the 15th, I believe, is the drop dead date on riffs. And
Yes.
for the bulk of people, coming up with a list they thought was going to be impossible as a practical matter. I had written that down as a data point. I don't know, basically they're saying this is a state problem. To a certain extent, it's really not our problem. Whether or not you think that's true or not, that was their take on the matter. When people have gone around the horn, I do want to ask a couple of questions, but I did want to clarify at least the data that Mr. Fine was asking for.
Madam
So
Chair?
hold on, Priscilla. I'd like to give everybody a chance, but I think if we would give our principal a chance to have his report, I think a lot of our questions might be answered. So I'm gonna go through and let everybody have one thing, but Chris has got a decent report out there on how we can handle things. Priscilla, go ahead.
Just wanted to say that I think one thing that we also need to figure and plan on is the fact that our students have been out of school. They have been without their teachers. They're at a really low level, and we need to really be sure that we have a fantastic program in place for them in the fall, because they're going to be coming back and need lots and lots of support. So I'm really pleased with the superintendent saying at this point, we cannot take away the teachers that we planned on. We definitely thought that program was necessary for them. So therefore, just because we've got this situation now, I think we still need to plan a good program for them. Thank you.
Anyone else have a question for Mr. Pratt? Hearing none, let's move on to the principal's report.
So let me start. Well, there's a couple of things, Molly. I've got some very specific details that I had intended to make a part of the conversation for item 8A. It speaks a little bit to the conversation that's going on here now, so I don't know whether you want me to wait until that agenda item, because otherwise what I'm going to do is read the principal's report that I shared with all the board members about 45 minutes before the meeting, because other people haven't had a chance to read that. So would you like me to start with that part of my principal's report, Molly?
Let's start with what you sent us, and
Okay.
we'll see how
Yep.
the room feels.
All right. So, as I typically do at a regular meeting, because TV is there and not everybody gets a chance to peruse this beforehand, if folks will bear with me, I'm going to read it. It's just a couple of pages. The two topics that are under principal's report are update on current school operations, academic instruction, learning opportunities, and planning for the end of the school year. So those are my two topics. As I write this summary of our new remote delivery of the instruction of and educational activities for our students, I do so with us having 3 weeks or more of online and other types of remote learning behind us. This is an important point to lead with for at least two reasons. One, if you reference my principal report from the last board meeting, you'll see that we took advantage of our last few weeks of face-to-face instruction to prepare for this possibility. And number two, we are already drawing from these early experiences in this new approach to education to make adjustments to our delivery of the goods. For the sake of brevity, I will spare the details of some of our trial and errors that have led us to our current mode of operation. So here are some bulleted details on what we are currently doing. We are using our morning assembly day schedule as our foundation for our school day. That has students joining their first block class at about 9:10. Teachers have been directed to provide new learning opportunities, new material, and direct instruction for just the first half of each block, with the second half of the 74-minute blocks dedicated to teachers being available for extra help and support for students who are in need. This also makes time available, spread throughout the day, for students to be scheduled for remote support by SPED service providers when those services have already been previously written into a student's IEP. Item number 2 here, based upon both best practice recommendations and our own observations and experiences thus far in this transition, students are being purposely scheduled into a much shorter overall day of direct instruction, not counting students who choose to do more or seek extra help. The draft of our continuity of learning plan calls for no more than 3 hours per day of active student engagement in new learning at the high school level. Just as an aside, it calls for less than that for younger grades. The plan, as we currently have it configured, has students with 4 blocks of academics set for 2 hours and 28 minutes of that new learning / direct instruction. By scheduling it this way, it gives our teachers the flexibility to go slightly past the defined half a block of direct instruction if needed, to wrap up a concept on any given day. Item C under number 1. All of our teachers have the capability to conduct virtual classroom experiences through virtual conferencing like Google Hangouts, Meet, or Zoom. If you're wondering, Zoom is what we're doing right here. Teachers are employing a range of additional instructional strategies to keep the new learning moving forward. Nearly all teachers make use of Google Classroom as the foundation for their delivery of instructional experiences, materials, and new assignments. Fortunately, many of our teachers had already been using Google Classroom as a primary organizational tool before we moved to remote learning. Now moving forward, beginning after our return from our April vacation, which we are on right now, we will run a weekly schedule that continues as an alternating day schedule, Monday through Thursday, with Friday as a day of minimal direct academic engagement, a day primarily focused on catching up for the students, and a day primarily used for meetings and planning for teachers. This day will have academics and some student engagement with teachers, necessary to make the right kind of progress in our overall plan and necessary to have the day count for attendance. And yes, we are taking attendance, which will be needed for all schools to get credit for the day to count toward our overall total of student days for the school year. I will stop there and see if anyone has any questions about what we got going on. I see David
Anyone have any questions?
has got his hand up.
I see David.
Thank you, Molly. My question, Chris, is what is the percentage of kids who are currently engaged in instruction, and what is the percentage of kids that are not engaged in instruction?
Well, I can't tell you that I have the answer to your question, David, mostly because I didn't prepare for that, but I will say that one of our weekly functions that we have engaged in is a fairly detailed and lengthy meeting with guidance to address the students that are struggling. And we get that information from the teachers. And a measure of that is the level of engagement for the students. And the last time we met, we had a conversation of covering about 32 specific students. That does not mean there are 32 that are, completely disengaged. It means there were 32 students that were struggling enough to warrant being part of that conversation. So that's about 10% of the student body. But again, I have to say, that doesn't mean that they're totally clueless or totally lost, but just means that there are some struggles worthy of that conversation.
Molly, I'd like to follow that question up just a moment. And I have to say, Chris, I'm a huge admirer of your leadership in the school. However, I do think that the principal needs to know how many students he's reaching and how many students he's not reaching. So if you don't know how many students you're not reaching, I think it would be good to find that out.
Well,
not tonight, but when you have the opportunity.
Well, again, what I want to tell you, David, is I can do the math now. So basically 90% are not a part of that weekly conversation, which would put that 90% of the student body in the making it work category.
Chris, you're dodging me.
How's that, David? So what exactly did you want to know?
Well, Chris, I'll repeat the question again. Yeah. My question is, how many students are not engaged in academics?
Okay, so you're right. I don't have that answer for you, but of the 32 that are struggling, many of them are engaged, but struggling to engage. And a small part of that is not engaged at all. So, but I'll go back to the beginning, David. Since I hadn't been armed with that question, I don't really have the answer to that, but I will tell you, I feel like we as a school have a very good grasp on who's engaged and to what level. I just don't have a percentage for you.
Thank you, Chris.
I'm gonna go to Jack first and then Colin, I'll get you. Jack, did you have a question?
Yes, it's essentially a follow-up on the question David asked, and the reason I'm pushing on this is because we had sent emails about this subject specifically. For example, engaged is a vague term. There are kids that are offline and essentially not getting the same level of access due to being on the wrong side of the digital divide. Why it matters is because I've gotten information from VTEL, from Verizon, and from the Vermont Community Foundation to get students hooked up to the bandwidth they need, but we need to know who it is or how many there are and give folks that might be interested in helping this some parameter, knowing what the size of the problem is.
Sure.
So that's important. Now,
Yeah,
is it that, or is it
so
that it's just not
right.
showing up and not in on the other side of the screen is a different question.
Right. So Jack, and again, you and I had an email exchange on this. The point that I made in that email exchange is when we have that meeting to talk about the students who are struggling, I can't think of a single one that the issue is connectivity to the internet. Your question in the email was specifically about broadband access, but I shared with you there are folks who are accessing some of their data plans reasonably and appropriately to make those connections. So,
well, the second half of this was that we had heard, and it was in print, in the Brattleboro Reformer, there were students who, in the middle of instruction, were not only going mute, but were turning off their videos, so the teacher had no idea whether or not they were engaged, even in the presence of instruction or not, and that's the other half of the question.
It looks like Mr. Pratt has a follow-up.
Yeah, I think people have to be clear in regards to where we were a few weeks ago and where we're required to be starting on April 20th. We're going from a temporary plan just to provide students with work and that short term to a continuity of education, meaning we need to provide these services, we need to provide them work, and it needs to be equitable. As far as everything that so far everyone has brought up in regards to students' access in computers and everything like that, that's what this continuity of education plan is there to address. And we know it's a bigger problem than just each town. It's a statewide problem in regards to connectivity. But through the surveys that we're doing and everything that the schools are doing, as well as in working to make sure that all students have access to not just devices, but to access the broadband aspect of it, that's all part of, starting on April 20th, what we're trying to achieve. And that we've been working up to that point as far as getting to that continuity of education, going from transferring from just supplemental work to, okay, we're moving forward with full boat education. All that stuff is part of the plan and, that we sent up to the state, and we're going to continue to work on that. But I mean, I've noticed that it's been many times that there are inaccuracies in regards to, or general terms in the media in regards to what we have been doing versus what we need to be doing. And I'm not just saying for Wyndham Northeast, I'm thinking statewide, is that there's so much information going in and out on a regular basis. By the time it reaches the paper, a lot of times it's already been changed and it's outdated. So I think we do need to, be careful in regards to taking what we see in the paper as concrete, factual information. They're doing the best they can to get information out, and I understand that, but sometimes it's changing before it hits the paper.
Colin, you're up. You gotta unmute, Colin.
Yep, there we go. So my question is to Mr. Hodson, how does your staff and the faculty feel? I mean, are they doing the best? Obviously, they're doing the best they can to try to reach out to our students. In your discussion with them, give us a little flavor of how they feel about trying to provide our students
I feel like if I were to generalize, most teachers are reasonably content with how we have rolled this out and where we are right now. I think that most teachers feel like they have a handle on how to make the best possible progress that we
Okay.
can. That's
And other
what I
than
can
that,
say
David,
is
hey, and just
after
a follow-up question too. The school itself, we do have we do have access to obviously computers, but how many tablets do we have? I mean, have parents reached out to you at all for students in need that would suggest maybe delivering that with their lunch and sort of loaning them a tablet?
Sure. So to our great advantage, this school year, we rolled out a one-to-one Chromebook program for students. So
Okay. I remember
our
that.
students have that access. When we started this, there were a few that had left them in the buildings, and we have a protocol in place for the delivery of those things.
Okay.
In some cases, it goes along with food delivery. In other cases, we have protocol where they can call us, let us know what they need and where it is. They'll schedule a time to come in, and then we'll meet them at the door with whatever they need.
All right. Good to know. Thank you.
Priscilla.
Yes, you mentioned 32 students that you were discussing. Of course, those are at all levels of either totally unengaged all the way up to almost engaged to the level that the teacher would want. And I do know that even when you're in school sessions, you also have those same kind of discussions over students, particularly that freshman academy group coming in as to they're struggling or doing the others. So it's an ongoing thing where in a classroom, you can also sit there and be staring at the teacher and maybe not even be engaged with what's going on. So can you give us your best estimate, Chris, of the comparison, whether it's the same, whether there's more, whether there's less with this type of?
I would say the numbers are similar, so that when typically, I mean, really what the meeting that I'm talking about, that we have to talk about struggling students, has morphed from what was an attendance meeting to a struggling students meeting. And so in the attendance meeting, that conversation, as you might imagine, was typically about students whose attendance was a significant obstacle to getting the most out of their education. Same sort of thing. Some folks for whom the attendance is horrible, and some whom are coming onto the radar screen. And but I would say the percentage of struggling kids is similar. The driving factors of those struggles are different. And as I again mentioned in my emails with Jack on this, a lot of what is driving some of the challenges for students is the new learning environment. That is the environment at home. And that is not necessarily about an environment that is inherently bad. It just might not be a great environment for education. And that, kids are like teachers figuring this out as we go along and trying to make the best of it and learning how to adjust on the fly to make it work. But some kids are better at that than others, and many of those 32 are having challenges along those lines.
Thank you.
Chris?
Yeah, just to remind people is that this is not our current status is not to replace, chip for chip what we were doing in the schools. It's to come up with a plan so kids aren't getting huge learning gaps in their education. This was never intended to replace it chip for chip.
And that kind of speaks to one of Jack's questions over here. His major concern is whether students, seniors especially, will be able to meet the mastery levels needed to be considered sufficiently progressed to graduate or to go on to the next level of their subject. So the next big meeting that I'll have with guidance is going to be about seniors. And we will review all of them and spend as much time as necessary on those who might have been struggling if we stayed in our traditional mode of instruction. But Chris Pratt makes a very good point. You don't have to be a mathematician to figure out that if you have reduced what was a 6.5-hour day to a 3-hour day, teachers have to make decisions about the content that they're covering, to what level, what mastery looks like. Teachers are still focusing on their proficiencies in each of their classes. And again, we're 3 weeks into this, so we're going to do the best we can to cover the right kinds of things to the right level of mastery. But I will say, and I break this out in a little more detail in my next report, there will definitely be cleanup next year. And that cleanup is going to be labor intensive. There are going to be students who are signing up for classes next year that we want to have completed as well as we do if we don't have disruptions. But the starting point for every one of those classes is going to be different than it would have been if we just had business as usual. And that's going to be time consuming. It's going to be tricky, and we'll have to figure that out too.
Margot.
So I'm going to speak, I guess, a little bit as both a board member, but also as a parent. And I want to just extend my thank you to the teachers, the staff, all of you. It's been a really challenging situation. And, you know, just like the students, every teacher, every staff member is at a different comfort level with rolling out what had to come very quickly and is at different stages of being prepared. And I feel like everything that I have seen, from guidance to teachers to administration, has been, you know, the best that we can expect in a situation that is so unusual. And it's a really challenging situation, and it's been an interesting experience as a parent to see where, you know, students who might do really well in one environment, say the classroom environment, might have a really tough time in a home environment learning online. And it's a new skill, and it's a skill that, you know, we're all learning together. And I mean, I working from home, and I'm having to learn these skills too. And it's a challenge, but it's lifelong lessons. So they're maybe not getting everything that they're getting in the classroom, but they are getting some life skills that will last them forever, because, you know, they're learning how to be organized and learning how to work in an online system, how to really start organizing their days. And so there's some unintended consequences that are some great learning opportunities. And I just, you know, again, I just want to say thank you, because I think all the questions that have been asked are really important. We never want to assume or know that, you know, we know that there's going to be kids, and it doesn't necessarily going to be the same kids that are struggling in the school environment. There will be new kids that are falling through the cracks in this system because of a different learning style or access to internet or computer access, home environment. So there's going to be those kids, and I think those questions that board members asked are really important. And I am pleased to hear that the school is really starting to try to identify and address, and how do we reach those students. I know that guidance has been reaching out and trying to really help, and thank you.
So I'd like to have Chris be able to finish his report, but I can't see Deb, Wright, or Jack on my screen. Is Deb and Jack all set? No comments?
Yeah.
They must be.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, so part 2 of my written report, planning for the end of the school year. As many of you already know, time of the school year from April through graduation is the busiest in terms of school activities, events, and field trips. In general, I have approached the canceling of any event by waiting as long as possible to make the call. I have chosen this approach not to introduce any false hope into the thoughts of those who are well invested in these activities, but more as a function of the constantly changing state of affairs in the response to the COVID-19 crisis. These major events include, but are certainly not limited to graduation, class night, senior banquet, trips to Boston, New York City, drama and musical productions, Women's Club Art Show, the Junior Prom, NHS inductions, The list goes on. Arguably, the biggest event on that list is graduation and the associated alumni weekend events. We have not yet made any decisions about graduation or alternatives to a traditionally planned and scheduled graduation ceremony. I still feel like it's too early for such a decision. However, it is not too early to consider our options. Those options center around looking for the best alternative dates to come together as a group, as opposed to seeking a virtual graduation experience that occurs on or about the current graduation date of June 18th. In consultation with the head advisors of the senior class who have been in touch with the seniors, we feel like it is best to establish a priority for planning purpose of holding an in-person event at a date when we can all come together rather than a virtual date. However, we are not closed off to any reasonable ways to hold a graduation ceremony, either in person or not. We are exploring the availability of companies that can help organize a virtual graduation experience in case we find that option be the best choice, all things considered. That said, I want to reiterate that we are focusing our energies on planning for the best time to host an in-person event. When we are in a better place to make such a decision, we will keep all of the key players in the loop.
Thank you.
That's my report.
Anything else for Chris? Looks like there is none.
Okay.
We have on the agenda finance. Do we have a finance report, Chris Pratt? You're muted.
So I spoke with the auditors the other day, and we're hoping to have the a draft of the audit within 2 weeks. I asked them that the boards need to see something, and they need to see something soon. So I'm hoping probably end of next week we have to get a draft of the audit that I can send out to the board, and we can go through. So that's where we are right now.
Okay. Next item agenda is committees. Do we have a policy committee meeting?
Nope, no policy
update?
committee.
Nothing. Looks like we would like to schedule a building and grounds meeting.
How would we do
My
that?
question is, how would we do that with the Molly, with the social distancing?
I don't know as we can.
Well,
was just-
Okay.
there is the possibility. I mean, you could always have a Zoom meeting, and if there was something that needed to be shown in person, the person at the school building who's by themselves has, a laptop, and they're showing on the Zoom meeting what they're talking about.
Yeah, I would
That's
say
one possibility.
I don't see a need for a buildings and grounds meeting,
Okay.
at least currently.
That's what we need to hear, Chris.
Sure.
So we're gonna move that to the next meeting and see.
Molly?
if we-
Molly, before you do that,
Hold on.
why,
Slow down, Priscilla. Go ahead.
why would that not be able to be discussed just like this with all of us, if that's the case?
So what I'm saying is this certainly could happen this way. I'm saying I don't have items for a buildings and grounds committee meeting.
Okay, that sounds logical.
Okay. Mr. Clark, WNSU board meeting review.
Thank you, Molly. WNESU board reorganized. We went for what I would refer to as a streamlined agenda, where we simply packed the previous slate of officers and appointments and took one motion on them. I believe there were 3 substantive items of business that took place during that meeting. One was that we extended to Chris Pratt, and I believe decided a 3-year contract, which binds him to the district. Help me here, Chris, through 2023, I believe. The second item was that once again, the WNESU board, in its infinite wisdom, declined to pass a motion for a bus loan for, I think, approximately $17,000 for a Dodge van, which we seem to own, and maybe the repo man will be after, we'll find out. And then, of course, the most controversial issue of the night was that the WNESU board, on a vote of, I believe, 5-2 with one abstention, passed a motion with regard to RIFs for paraprofessionals. There's some nuance to that motion, which is that paraprofessionals are not the board's employees. They are the superintendent of schools employees. So we legally cannot RIF. We can simply urge that the superintendent give it consideration. This turned out, at least in one quarter of our board meeting tonight, to be quite controversial. And I think you will get a different take on it if the chair wishes to recognize and Priscilla Lambert wishes to express her concerns about it.
Priscilla?
Well, the bus first, I think the bus could be brought up again if we need the money. I didn't think at the time because I voted against it. So I'm one of the ones that could bring it up again at the next meeting if we need to. But I thought the money was available already. So that was one of my concerns and one of the reasons I didn't want it brought up again. But that's something that if it does need to be brought up again, David, you need to get back to us on it because I was one of the ones that did vote against it. So I could bring it up again, which is a point of order. I am concerned about any layoff of the paras because I think they're needed to do the school. I think they are supportive of our students. Our students need them. I think they are a large part of teaching our students the concern and care for the community that is needed out there. I also do know, and I am not willing to put into words, probably the stuff that the note that came from the lawyer that has to do with this issue that was not shared with that board because of the possibilities of future things from the public. That's a private issue since it's from a lawyer. I think the board should have had that information prior to taking that vote. That was my concern and my big concern, because I think as chair of the board, the chair has that responsibility to the board to let them know all of the factors before they vote. So yes, I am concerned with that vote. And yes, the superintendent does have the right to fire an employee, but as far as laying off a whole group of school people, that would be something I think that needs to be kind of discussed, and maybe because I think the board would have some oversight on that because we are responsible for the budget and for running of the schools. So I don't think that's something that the superintendent would want to do anyway, as far as lay off a whole group of people. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else for David? Let's move on to unfinished business. Update on proposed driveway parking lot replacement project. Mr. Hosden.
Yeah, I don't have a lot on that except to say that as a reminder, that vote did not come to completion on town meeting day because of an error in the Rockingham ballot. I am not sure what, in our current situation, the plan is for replacing that vote. I know that there was a time in May, but I essentially want to tell the board that it'll be my recommendation to kind of put that on the back burner. It didn't look like it was going to happen for this summer anyhow. And so I think that's something that we're going to need to revisit once we get deeper into the next school year. So, but I just want to.
There's no reason, once that is, I mean, once Rockingham votes on that and that's approved, there's no legal date saying when we have to start that, right? We can just move it to next year.
Right.
Okay. Colin? You got on mute.
I would, I know I keep forgetting. I would say, definitely, obviously, keep it on the back burner, Mr. Hudson. But if we are, the village of Bellas Falls has their elections in May, and I believe speaking to the town clerk that we were going to put that on the
Yep, that's the intention.
May, but who knows what's going to happen with that election. So,
Right.
But just a thought to maybe follow up with the town clerk.
Sure.
And figure that out.
Yeah, we've been in correspondence with them.
Okay. Okay.
Priscilla?
I do agree
Priscilla?
with Chris. I think it should be. Are you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I do think that at this point, I agree with Chris that it should be on the back burner because I think with the all of the costs and everything at this point, I don't think it's a good thing for us to be putting it on a thing out there to vote at this time.
No.
Okay. New business.
Jack, I think Jack may have been raising his
Oh,
hand.
sorry, Jack. I can't see on my screen. Go ahead, Jack. Thank you,
No
Myra.
problem. The question was really a technical one as to when we raise money for any given fiscal year and then do not spend that money, how that works. I know that normally we can't incur a surplus. Are we raising the money? Are we going out to obtain that cash? How does this work?
So that was going to be a complicating factor that we were going to figure out once we knew whether it was passed. Because the complicating factor is this: because of this delay, there really was no chance for us to get this work done this summer. It's work that's going to have to be done during a summer, not during the operating year. So we were going to have to figure that question out, Jack, because this vote was going to happen and the work wasn't going to be able to happen until we entered into the 2021-2022 budget. So
I would offer.
that's a good question.
I would offer to you calling Tim Ash and Missy Johnson because I did raise this with them at one point, and I think they would be interested in hearing a better definition than they're going to get from me about the nature of the problem because they've got a laundry list of things they're trying to clean up in the legislature, and that may be one of them. So I would urge you to, or Chris Pratt, somebody, to give them a contact because they are rather expecting us to.
If you can email me that contact information, and that would be great, Jack.
David Clark.
Thank you, Molly. As a point of clarification, I believe that what was voted on in 3 of the towns was to issue a bond, and that would be a borrowing for a set length of time.
Yep.
I am of the belief that the authority to bond for a construction project does not obligate the district to go through with that bond if the directors feel it's not in the best interest of the school or the community.
Right.
I think the question Jack is possibly raising is whether that bond can be rolled over into the 2021 school year.
Yeah,
and that certainly we should seek a legal opinion on. If we can get it out of the legislation, probably out of the legislature, I suppose we could do that. But I think you might get a more accurate answer if you contacted a lawyer.
Okay.
Okay. So we're going to move on to new business for discussion or action. And before, David, you start, I'm just going to read this line. Agree to voluntary 15% reduction in FY 2021 expenditures, balance to be used to reduce FY 21-22 taxation. Now, before I let David speak, I'm going to speak for just a second. I am a true believer when someone is passionate about something to let them have the floor and let them speak to us. And David does so much work with these boards and really believes in this. So I want to let him speak, let him show us what he's learned, and then we will have all the chance in the world to comment. It doesn't mean we're taking action tonight. If the board decides they want to, that's something different. But let's let David show us what he's learned, and then we will proceed. David, you have the floor.
Thank you, Molly. Okay. I asked to have this placed on the agenda tonight because, as everyone in this room and plenty of people who aren't in this room are aware, we're looking at what is likely to turn out to be a 100-year financial event here. This is going to place severe pressure on taxpayers, not just in our community, but all over the state of Vermont. The most, I think, immediate outcome of this is that we've seen a virtual total collapse in sales and use and rooms and meals tax revenues. And the part that could be collected probably won't be collected, at least in the near future, because the governor of Vermont declared both a sales tax and a rooms and meals tax holiday. I don't know that he had considered the fact that that was a revenue stream that accounts for approximately 1/3 of the support that education, public education in Vermont receives. That's bad news. The even worse news is shortfalls in rooms and meals and sales and use will be made up by the property tax. And property tax owners who already will be stressed financially, attempting to meet their obligations, will become even more stressed. As Jack Breyer pointed out earlier in this meeting, the towns, irregardless of whether they actually realize the revenue, will have an obligation to remit those funds to the state of Vermont, even if they borrow. And my purpose in proposing this motion was that I believe very strongly that the schools need to demonstrate genuine concern for the current circumstances and likely to be future circumstances of taxpayers and voters. And I think that if we proceed with what may be perceived as the attitude that we have a budget and we're going to spend it, I think we will get to next March and find out that the voters had a very different idea, and we may end up with cuts which I think could be substantially in excess of the 15%. In that regard, Molly, I would like to offer a motion, which is to agree to a 15% voluntary reduction in fiscal year 2021 expenditures, balance to be used to reduce fiscal year 21-22 taxation. And I make this motion full in the knowledge that any member of this board could offer an amendment. And it's entirely possible that this board, this motion may not receive a second and die on the floor as it is. But I think it's important that we have this discussion because I think that we need to demonstrate to our constituents that we are aware that they are under severe pressure, and if we can, we would like to help relieve some of that pressure. Thank you, Molly.
So we are a small board. We do not need a second. There's a motion on the floor, and it is open for discussion. Colin, your hand was up first, so I'm going to let you have it.
Thank you very much, Molly. My question would be back to David. Again, this is just Union High School reductions, and if you could maybe break down a little bit more so I could understand it a little more.
Yeah, exactly.
If I'm queried, Molly, the response is this: boards certainly can move to create reductions in force. I think a 15% reduction almost certainly would require a reduction in force. But I also think that one of the reasons we hire administrators is to give the board guidance as to how the board effects a policy change that it wants to see happen. So the short answer, Colin, is I don't have categorical cuts here. I'm suggesting that administration be asked to come up with what they would consider to be doable. And I want to say one other thing. Now, this leads into the Chris Hodgson discussion here. Administration may have very different ideas about how to get there. And I certainly would like to hear what the principal has to say.
So Chris Hodgson, I'm going to call on you, but first I'm going to let the board members go. Deb Wright has her hand up.
Thank you, Molly. My concern here is that if we're doing no reductions in force of any kind, and apparently that's where we're going with it, that 80% of our budget is payroll and benefits. That leaves us with 20%, and then after 15%, only a nickel is left to spend on anything else. I don't see how something like that. I understand the need. I desire these savings. I desire this, what we need to do to help the taxpayer in our community over the next, particularly the next new fiscal year. However, I don't see how we're going to get there if we don't do any RIFs. And that's all I have to say about that. Thank you.
Anyone else before I let Chris have the floor? Priscilla?
Yes, I cannot see that the teachers and Chris and all of his staff going out and spending anything at this time that they don't absolutely need to spend. I think he's well aware of where we're at as far as savings for the taxpayer. He's a taxpayer himself. And and our superintendent as well. I don't think that we need to put in a motion of this kind and address it for our administrators who are working to keep their costs down.
Mr. Pratt?
Yeah, I just, want to follow up on this, is that it's not that, we all understand, the direction we're going in regards to the taxpayers of the communities, but, we still have to educate these students. And we know we need to do something. We just don't know what that is. But making unnecessary rifts at this point, knowing that it could jeopardize the education that we were hired to provide these students, I think that's the dilemma that we're all facing right now. Is we do understand the tax impact, but for us as educators, principals, administrators, and teachers, our priority is making sure that we are doing our job, and that's providing these kids with an education, whether it's in the building or outside of the building.
So I have Margaret with a hand up, and then Jack, I'll get you.
So I want to thank David for presenting this, and I think that it's a really important idea for us to be considering, and I think it's going to be probably a big agenda item as we move forward over the next coming months. However, I guess my personal opinion is that we are too early in this situation to have enough information to make wise choices for next school year. And that as things continue to progress, we will find more information, and that we will, recognizing that we will have some big important decisions to make. I guess I just feel like we're not quite at that point yet that we can make well-founded, at least for me. I guess I should speak for me. I don't feel like I'm at a point where I can make well-founded decisions based on the information that I've seen out there.
Jack, you're up.
Okay, a couple of things. First off, the irony here is that the fiscal problem and the staffing problems are happening in 2 different years. This year, we have a staffing problem in that there are people who really are not properly fitted to the tasks that we now have in our online world. They just aren't. We are very likely to be in this electronic method of instruction to close to the end of the school year, if not to the end of the school year. There really is a problem in finding ways to make full use of the team that we have. We have the money to pay them, but there's also options such as the rather generous unemployment program that's been put in place to cushion folks who may be better off in terms of our fiscal situation, better off being laid off and better off for them. Next year, however, we have a different problem in that we have probably a greater staff need than we normally would have because we're trying to make up a year and a half inside of a year, and we might not have any money to pay for them. So the real question here, from my perspective, is what can be done immediately so that we don't have to make cuts in a year where the demand for educational services are going to be, if anything, greater than they are this year. And I don't have an answer to that, but I think that's a better phrasing of the question. There are things we can do now. But next year, if anything, we're going to have a whole lot of kids that took algebra and got about 70% of their needs, and we may have the world's largest version of Freshman Academy going across 3 grades, and that doesn't sound like a recipe for staff reduction, even in an era when we may be facing severe fiscal issues. That's all I got.
So Deb, you're the one I can't see. Are you okay?
Thank you for asking. Yeah, again,
Okay.
I do the Bill
So-
Gates form and other things. I don't prefer to have my picture up in there and wonder what's in my background. So it's really
That's
my house
fine.
a bunch of books. So I covered over. I don't want to be spied on when I'm not, paying attention to the camera. So
Perfect.
anyway, here's what I had to say. And thank you for checking with me. Is I don't think it's appropriate to say that we don't have enough information. The reality is that people are reluctant to think about it, so they put it off. We've had 6 weeks to be thinking about this. We've had time to watch the numbers. We've had time to get responses from the State Board of Education. They're giving us predictions right now. Those are numbers that we can use. You can look at the percentages yourself and know that there are things that we must do, and we must steer the course now. We can't wait until we run into the rocks, which is exactly what's going to happen. And we're going to come up in a shortfall, and we're going to say, okay, now we need to take out loans, which we don't want to take out because that's another burden later on down the road because they have to be repaid. We do have the technology. We do have the paperwork. We do have the numbers. We need to take some form of action. I'm concerned about just saying the motion to take off 15% because clearly you can see that there's no motion to move anything else except the non-human element in this picture. And we need to make, if we're going to do this, we need to do this properly, and we have the information, we need to do something. We just don't think 15% off the bottom is going to do what we need it to do, and we're going to suffer severely from doing it that way, just by knocking the stuff out that we don't want to deal with because of the things we don't want to look at. I don't know. That's it. I just think it's not going to work that way, but we do have the information to make something happen. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. So I'm going to give the floor to Chris, but before I do, I've thought a lot about this. I've had conversations with Chris. I've had conversations with David. I get where everybody is. I think that we are all worried about what's going to happen. What's going to happen? We don't know what's going to happen. I think that Chris has some good answers when I finally let him talk. But when I think about this, and this is, I mean, I'm as conservative as I get, and I want to save as much money as we can, but we have taken our community schools away from everyone right now, and we're stuck doing this. And when it finally opens up and we can finally have kids back in our school, if we do this the way this motion is right now, I'm gonna have to have a conversation with Chris. He's gonna tell me, Molly, there's no more football games or something. I don't know if that's what it is, but the point is we're gonna lose a huge part of what makes our community strong. And so until somebody has an amendment to this or something that helps me understand not just taking 15% off, but how are we going to do this if we have to do it? I think our community is too strong, and we need to just think about how that would ever have to happen. I think that Chris is going to answer that question for me. The fact is, I know he's going to, but we just need to think about what we're doing right now. Chris, it's all you.
Thank you. The one thing before I go to my kind of written thoughts, and that was one of the things that both Molly and David said, put it in writing and we'll see what the board has to think about what your thinking is and your plan is. 15% of a $7.5 million budget is $1,125,000. I just want to make sure that we are all aware of what we're talking about. Because I've done schools budgets for many, many years, and everyone is right about that can only happen through riffing. But finding $1 million to cut from a budget is it's a tall task, and that's an understatement at that point. So I have many reasons why the agenda item that is currently under consideration is unworthy of action at this point in time. I will note that I am taking this position because, one, the budget that we created is still the budget that is the right one to properly run the school and to properly provide the services that our students and community deserve and need, even more so in a time of crisis. We've all highlighted that. And two, any substantial reduction in force of spending for the 2021 budget could only be accomplished through reduction in force. We've just noted that. I have many supporting points for this position, each of which I feel passionate about as significant topics to consider, but which I will present in no particular order. First, the schools in all communities are currently the entities right behind healthcare services and first responders to shore up the fabric of our society in this time of need. We are providing an awkward sense of normalcy from a distance for families who are struggling to find any normalcy in their lives. We are continuing the education of students in ways that continue their learning at their current grade levels. In doing so, we are providing distraction and productive engagement at a time when it is desperately needed for families, and without which there would be none. We are actively supporting parents to support their children in their learning. And this is all happening while educators are figuring this out on the fly. While we are figuring this out, we are constantly identifying additional tasks, student needs, and responsibilities that then in turn turn into labor-intensive responses by the school. As I have said from the start of this reconfiguration to anyone who has asked about the workforce needed to pull this off, I don't know what that workforce looks like, but right now I cannot say we can do it with less staff, nor would I want to try. Again, Jack kind of made that point along the way here. I realize that the agenda item under consideration is focused on next school year and the associated budget. However, this is a good point in my argument to present one of my driving concerns for any decision-making based upon this conversation. It is way too early to make significant changes for the next school year. Yes, to Deb Wright's point, we do have facts and figures for predictions down the road, but as again, Jack had mentioned, there's an increased workload that we're gonna have to be attentive to. One of the many scenarios for the education system when late August rolls around and we are ready to begin the 2021 school year is that we are still serving our students remotely in ways similar to our current services. Dr. Fauci has recently said that he hopes we will be back in our schools, but if we are, it could look totally different, implying that we might not be back in our schools. If that is the case, I reiterate that right now on April 13th, I cannot easily define what that would look like beyond what we have pulled together in the last 3 weeks. So I cannot make any sort of staffing recommendation. Should we be fortunate enough to be back in our building, all board members need to be aware that right now we are providing services, while we are providing services remotely, we are doing so with significantly less time on task for students. That means that few, if any, classes will complete their courses by covering all of the usual amount of material. That is to be expected, but it will call for the school in all areas to do some of what I refer to as cleanup through the 2021 school year. What does that mean? It means when we come back together, it will be job one for all staff members throughout the district to hit the ground running at the start of the school year to get students up to where they would have normally been had we not had this disruption to this school year. Even though students will have successfully completed their current classes, they will certainly be behind in schools and knowledge compared to where they should be. The work to be done to play catch up through the 2021 school year will be labor intensive and cannot probably be accomplished with fewer people doing the work. This means that teachers and support people will need to devote more time and energy to fill in the skills gaps as the school year starts, while we are still working toward completing the class with all students having mastered the content for that new course. This will hold additional challenges for any students who already struggle to learn. Additionally, there will be lingering and significant social and emotional impacts for many students as we start the next school year. We've seen that already, so that's going to be a cleanup factor as well. The support staff members will have new challenges to support students through whenever we are able to return to business as usual. My point, we needed the staff size for this taxpayer approved budget called for when we expected the 2021 school year would be normal. Even if we are back in our buildings for the start of the next school year, the work needed to support the learning in that year will be far from a normal task. That task will certainly call for at least the workforce we plan to hire. We will need all hands on deck this next school year to right our educational ship and put us back on course, not fewer staff, to provide the educational services that our community needs. Point number 2, making a decision to cut staff at this point in time and as a result of this agenda item is not in keeping with the needed support of our current national priorities. Quite frankly, to make drastic cuts that result in rifts would be a somewhat selfish circle the wagons decisions that might very well serve the local taxpayers at a time when money is hard to come by. I understand the pull towards such action. We're all hurting. However, if you've been tracking the local and national news on a regular basis, one particular national need is clearly communicated. We need to keep people working. This is not the time when, if you can keep people employed, you let them go. How has this been made plainly clear? In many ways. First, the federal government has established a program, I think they call it the PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, in which small businesses can apply for loans for the money needed to pay the bills for an 8-week period. If at the end of that 8-week period, they have kept their businesses open and have maintained their entire workforce, if they have let no one go and have kept their business open, that loan becomes a grant. In other words, it is so much in the national interest to keep people working, to support our economy, and to facilitate the quickest rebound for our economy as possible, that our elected officials at the national level have decided that we should pay people even if there is no work to be done. Additionally, we know that the need for financial unemployment benefits is at an all-time high. Are we serving the greater good by sending even one more person into that unemployment line if we have a strong argument, that being the service to our students, to avoid it? I am proposing that we support the national need, yes, possibly to the detriment of the local need for tax relief by keeping people on the payroll, while in doing so, being fully aware that there is plenty of work to be done now more than ever. Again, to take action based on this agenda item would be self-serving in a way that is understandable, but in a way that runs counter to the overall national interest. And my third point, this course of action is not recommended, even by the people in Montpelier who seem to have a good understanding of the gravity of our economic challenges. In a report drafted late last week and published by the Vermont Legislative Joint Fiscal Office, a very detailed picture of the financial projections for the next couple of years ends with this statement. And by the way, Mr. Pratt's report gave you those details, but it ends with this statement. In any case, laying off teachers and staff would not be a desirable outcome in the midst of an economic downturn. Again, I want to say that again. That report concluded with, in any case, laying off teachers and staff would not be a desirable outcome in the midst of an economic downturn. In short, while doing this may seem like a reasonable solution to that dire description of the next couple of years found in that aforementioned report, the financial experts tell us that this would be counterproductive to a recovery. Again, this is not coming from the AOE, and it's not coming from the teachers union. This is coming from the people in Montpelier who know a lot about the current financial situation in our state and the path to recovery. The financial hardships that our community is experiencing, and that is the focus of this agenda item, are real and need some attention and action, not just the action indicated by this agenda item. So how do we address this? All right, folks, here we are, the plan. Number one, we need to and will review the 2021 budget for savings and reduce spending. We will do this. I have 15 years of experience in managing a school budget prudently. We have prudently and cautiously spent from other budgets in the past, and we can do this with this next budget, with an even greater emphasis on finding and creating savings. There are some places that I've already got some ideas. Number two, we have reserve funds that are currently designated for specific purposes through voter action at our annual meetings over the years, which could be repurposed through voter action to offset any potential shortfall in revenue. Again, I have some details that back that up. Step 3 of my 5-point plan. Part of the resolution to this as yet undefined or fully understood school budget challenge will be additional financial relief from both the state and federal governments. If we here at BFUHS, where we have a solid track record of managing our money well, if I do say so myself, run into financial hardship, how much more challenging will that situation be in other schools in Vermont? The relief will go to all schools. That will certainly be a part of the solution. And again, that fiscal report talks about some of the relief that has already been planned. Number 4, the district and the WNEA will be negotiating a master agreement for the upcoming school year and beyond. That negotiations process can be a place where the financial needs are addressed for the long term. Number 5, come October, we will be creating the budget for the 2021-2022 school year. That is also the place to thoughtfully address what will be at that time a better understood path through the economic crisis. Finally, and I feel like it's really important to end on this note, the most recent health and economic information provides, at the very least, a small level of optimism that we might get through this sooner rather than later. Again, according to nearly all news outlets, the intensive care admissions nationwide are down, the curve appears to be flattening, federal government is actively considering when, sooner rather than later, social distancing limitations can be lifted and businesses can open back up. The original predictions of from 100,000 to 240,000 deaths are now down to 60,000 nationwide. Have we turned a corner? I don't know, but that's just it. We don't know enough about the future turn of events to take this drastic action with respect to the 2020-2021 budget. And if we employ those 5 points listed above, we don't have to. We have alternatives. So, my summary. Number 1, there's a solid argument of a valid educational need to keep staffing as planned for the 2021 budget. Number 2, the action indicated in this agenda item runs contrary to things that everyone in this country needs to do in order to get through this. 3, no one besides some members of this board are recommending this sort of action at this time, at least anyone that I could find. 4, there are other ways besides RIFs to address the concerns expressed through this agenda item. And 5, the projections for the future in terms of health and economic recovery are in constant revision. Recent revisions that point toward a steadily improving situation. For all of these reasons, I strongly discourage action as proposed by this agenda item. I do suggest the following motion and action be taken by the board. So here's what I would suggest if anyone cares. I think that a better motion would be to direct that school administration seek throughout the 2021 school year opportunities for reduced spending and increased revenue, while with the goal of generating a surplus for the end of the 2021 school year, and with any surplus generated dedicated solely to reducing the tax burden in the 21-22 school budget. So David had said he would be open to ideas of a different motion. That's what I'm ending with. And I appreciate you taking the time to listen to that lengthy reading. Molly, that's all I got.
Thank you. Okay, everybody's heard from David and Chris and all of us. Does someone have, there's a motion on the floor right now. Do we want to amend the motion? Do we want to vote on the motion? What's the
Want
feel?
to move the motion, Molly. We want to move the motion
Okay.
first.
Jack and Deb, I can't see you. Are you good with that?
Good with that.
Okay.
You know, there's some things I don't know. That's all. I just, you know, I don't know if other school districts.
Point of order. I said to move the motion.
Well,
No
if
discussion.
you want a different vote, you can do that. But I'd like to ask these questions if you don't mind.
I moved the motion. You can't. All right, go ahead.
Kind of rude, but.
Thank you. I don't know if other districts in the state have had this discussion or not, and it would be useful to know if any of them have. And I'm asking this either to David or to Chris Pratt, and I'm wondering if they might be able to tell us about that and what their knowledge is about this. Because if we're doing this on our own, it's a different question for me than if we have a lot of company out there.
I could respond to that real quick. No, I have not. I meet with the regional East Regional Superintendents Group twice a week, and that has not come up yet in regards to for next year, what it looks like, just for the same reason a lot of people are discussing. We don't know. So no,
Okay.
that has not come up.
So that was a good question, and we have been asked to move to the motion. So let's move to the motion. We have a motion on the floor right now. David, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's to agree to voluntary 15% reduction in FY 2021 expenditures, balance to be used to reduce FY 21-22 taxation.
That is correct, Molly.
All those in favor of this motion, we need to have a roll call. So let's start with Priscilla.
No,
You got to name your name, please.
Priscilla.
Colin,
Colin, no.
Steve Fine. Steve, you're muted.
Muted.
Steve, you're muted. I can't.
Unmute yourself, Steve.
We're gonna, there we
Oh. Go ahead, Steve.
go ahead, Steve. We didn't hear you.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
I said yes.
All right. Margot,
This is Margot, and I vote no.
Mr. Clark. You're muted.
Yes, Molly.
Jack Breyer,
Regretfully, no. I think there's a good idea here, but this isn't quite it.
Deb Wright,
Yes.
Chris Pratt, can you help me with a count? I'm sorry, I lost track.
4 to 3.
You're muted, Chris.
4 to 3, Molly.
Yeah, Jack said no. Steven said yes. Margot said no. Colin said
No.
no. Mr. Clark said yes. Priscilla said no. And Deb's Wright said yes.
4 to 3.
All right, I get that now. Thank you. The vote is 4 to 3. The motion does not pass. Does anyone have anything else?
Do Chris's motion.
Does anyone have something else they wanted to put on the floor? Sounded like maybe someone else had another motion. If not, we're
is
gonna move
raising-
on.
Jack is raising his hand.
Mr. Breyer,
I really do think that it's imperative that we look at two items. One is whether or not there are cuts that can be made for the rest of this year. I don't really know what parameters we have since we are in a union environment and what options we have about emergency layoffs. But I think it's worth looking at if it's possible. And secondly, we would normally be approving a teacher roster this time of year. I'm disinclined to do that because of the exigencies of the issue. I think that I would be very interested in having Chris and our director of student services, both Chris's, start to take a very hard look at staffing in terms of whether or not we can move any classes online next year, because we're having some practice at that, and whether or not we should take a look at our para-staffing, which is among the highest in the state. And we really do need to take a look at that. It was really the 15% feels drastic, but I think the thrust of what David and Stephen and Deb have talked about here really needs to be taken to heart. And we really need to see some action, because otherwise this is going to come up again, perhaps with a different result.
Thank you. We are going to move on to appointments. I don't believe we have any, do we, Chris?
No, we do not.
No executive session. Let's move on to director's comments. Priscilla.
Yes, I have faith in Chris to do what he was putting in, the idea of a motion. I don't think we needed the motion, so therefore I didn't go ahead and make that one. But I think his ideas are good, and I think if he follows those ideas, we will have some reduction in our costs, and possibly we will be at a different point later on. And I appreciate everybody's attending to this tonight. I know that there were some people on both sides feeling both ways, and I appreciate their comments on both sides, every one of them. Thank you.
Colin James.
Yes, thank you, Molly. I just want to say that, you know, I'm really impressed. Here we are again in a, you know, a crisis. And, you know, Bellows Falls really always comes together. And it's just been, I've been very impressed with the administration, Superintendent Chris Pratt, our principal, Chris Hotston, assistant principal, John Broadley, just making everything, you know, possible efforts to provide the best we can for our students during this time. And, you know, again, we just come together, and I appreciate my colleagues on the board as well. You know, just we're trying to move along the best we can, and every day changes. I mean, you know, it could change in an hour. We just don't know. So again, thank you. And we're Bellows Falls strong. So let's keep it up.
David Clark.
Thank you, Molly. There are three things which keep going through my head tonight. And to begin with, I'm thinking that come next March, we're going to find out just how wise we were in the actions that were taken. And of course, I'll be looking at that through the prism of what the board has done, what I've done, and I will also be looking at it to see how Chris Hosden's 5 points of light pan out next March. I personally think we're going to find this was an opportunity squandered. I would be delighted to be wrong.
Margot.
I just want to thank everyone and for all the people that are attending who are watching this. Thank you for tuning in and being a part of this process. And I think that as a board and as a community, we will have hard decisions to make and talk about as we move forward. And I look forward to hearing the voices that make up this board. I think we have a representation of a lot of different ideas and backgrounds and expertise. And I appreciate that we're all able to contribute towards that. And I do think we will have some tough conversations. And yes, David, I hope somehow that you are proved wrong, although I think there's a lot of validity in what you're saying. And we will have some tough decisions to talk about as we move forward. So thank you for starting that conversation.
Stephen Fine.
I don't know if those were 5 points of light or death by 5 cuts, one or the other perhaps. But I'm really concerned about the fact that everybody seems to say something has to be done, something has to be done, but nobody's coming up with anything in particular except David, who made a very concrete proposal. And I can acknowledge that there would be great difficulty in putting it into effect. There's no doubt about it. But on the other hand, the proposal that Chris made just it's one of those things, you know, with all due respect to Chris, it's one of those wishy-washy things, you know. Give me a resolution that says we can do whatever we can do and let's all go home. And then, of course, our superintendent has nothing to suggest, which is very disturbing also. I hope you people are all correct, but I have a great fear that by the time you discover that it's time to do something, it's going to be too late to do something. That's it.
Deb Wright.
Thank you. I agree with what David has said. I do not think he took this 15% motion lightly when he knew it was, he clearly knew as well as everyone else that it meant about $1 million. It is the board which is fiduciarily responsible for setting the budget, therefore amending a budget or asking for cuts to occur, asking for superintendents and staff to do their best to save money has only, in the past years that I have been watching the budget, accounted for something in the range of 10% of what David is asking. That will not be sufficient to cover our needs. In the short run, it seems like we don't have to do this. We set a budget, we should be able to spend the money, but that is not what is going to happen. There will be shortfalls in our taxpayers. That burden will come before us, and we will have to make even more drastic and upsetting changes to make these things work. What we get from the state is not set in stone. You may not get any help in the way we wish. So I want the boards to be aware, we set the budget. We therefore must make course corrections in order to make this ship steer properly. This is not the job of the superintendent, nor of the principals, nor the other staff to make those cuts. It is ours to use the numbers and information that we have available to us to make the right choices.
Jack Breyer.
This motion lost on a 4-3 vote, and a rather wobbly 4-3 vote, if I might characterize mine. That does mean that a warning has been put out that we really are going to have to be serious about changes. I recognize there's an old rule that says you can make 2% cuts to anything, but if you make more than 5%, you're going to have to entirely restructure what it is you're doing. And I think that we're not going to go back to the way we've educated, particularly our high school age students going forward. We're going to be dealing with some version of COVID for the next 18 months to 2 years. The world is not going to be the same. And the reason you got a 4-3 vote is because there's a recognition that you're going to need the additional time, that 15% in the next few months isn't going to be sufficient time. But that doesn't mean that you have infinite amount of time, and it doesn't mean that there aren't going to need to be cuts, if not 15%. So please bear that in mind, because I think David's prediction about an incipient taxpayer rebellion is probably well-founded, and we'll have to see how it goes. I have confidence that the Chris's will respond to an emergency. I just want to emphasize that there actually is one here. Thank you.
Chris Pratt.
Yeah, just want to respond. Either people are, saying that, no one's proposing anything at this time. That does not mean that something won't be proposed down the road. I think at this point, you can't propose anything. It's kind of like you're trying to come up with a game plan, not knowing who you're going to play. As soon as we find out who that is, then yes. I mean, there are things I believe that the administration across the board and myself have ways of doing that, and based on the current information, just because we're not making a decision tonight or tomorrow doesn't mean that decisions won't be made. I don't think it'd be unfair for, my job is to educate the kids. Mr. Hodson's job is to educate these students. I think it'd be unfair for us to make any kind of suggestions on how we cut the budget if it means it's going to impact the students of this community when it's our job to educate these kids. Yes, things need to be done and we'll figure out to do that. But just because we're not sitting here doing it tonight doesn't mean that we're not continuing to think about it. And when the time comes, if we have to, that difficult decisions will have to be made.
Thank you. So my turn. It was a 4-3 vote. Chair didn't vote. I was really on the fence on this one. And I hope, and I have a lot of respect for Chris, and you're gonna do what you gotta do. I hope that we really look at things, and I don't believe that there's any extra in our budget, but I do hope that we look at staffing and we look at everything around us really hard and try to do the best we can. Not that you don't always do the best you can, but we all know we're in different times, and just be super careful. I know we have some reserve funds, but we also set those reserve funds up because there's things we need to do to keep our school up. And so let's just, I'm going to leave you with, I know you're going to be, but let's be really careful on, how we prepare for next fall, because that's where we're at. I think we all feel like we need to be kind of on edge here about where the money is going to come from, and nobody wants to, I think that motion was a strong motion and it was strong worded, and it kind of scared some people because it didn't really give us a plan on how that was going to happen. And I don't know if that was really David's job to find out how that was going to happen, but maybe we got to really look at everything around us. And Chris Hodgson, I know you'll do that, and I know you're doing it every day. And I don't want to pull the carpet out from underneath you. We're just going to continue the way you manage, and you will get it done. I just, I think this is a hard conversation. And it's a conversation that's not going to go away until we really feel like the world is back to what might be normal next, because it'll never be back to where it was. Thank you. If anybody has any agenda items for the next board meeting, please email Chris or I. The next board meeting is May 11th. I would like to call this meeting adjourned.